What is up, Earth's mightiest subscribers? It's Blerd without fear. Welcome back to the channel. Alright, today's video, we're going to be talking about The Fall of the House of X, #1, written by Gerry Duggan, with art by Lucas Wernick, and color by Brian Valenza. So this is the beginning of the end for the Krakoan era. Technically, The Fall of X is supposed to be that as well, but this is actually the true beginning of the end, because this story arc, The Fall of the House of X, as well as its companion story arc, The Rise of the Powers of 10, is basically meant to be a sequel to House of X and Powers of 10. The entire arc of the Krakoan era is ending the way it began, with the dual story arc. And technically, while this is meant to be the end, we're also going to be getting X-Men Forever, which I want to say is a 4-part miniseries, which will also kind of tie in and bridge the gap between the Fall of the House of X and Rise of the Powers of 10, and the upcoming June or July release, which is X-Men From the Ashes. This first issue, referred to as The Trial of Cyclops, is pretty much what you would expect it to be. It largely does focus on Cyclops. Cyclops is our narrator, as well as a character we focus on probably more than anyone else. And for good reason. He has been imprisoned since the Hellfire Gala this year, and we really haven't seen or heard much from him since. Just a few scant appearances here or there. This is the most Cyclops I think we've seen since Gerry Duggan's X-Men issues prior to the Hellfire Gala. And what's going on here? This all starts off with a dream that is full of Easter eggs, I would dare say. And it starts off with Cyclops being dragged through the desert by a, for the most part, unnamed and very largely overshadowed individual on a horse. Basically dragged through town the same way that criminals and other undesirables were dragged through town back in the Wild West, tied up and behind a horse. It's never really stated or shown who this person is, and there really aren't any hints, at least in my opinion, to the person's identity, or if their identity is even important. But considering that we see who the judges are in this particular scenario, I think it's safe to say that if this dream does persist and is revisited, a lot of the things that we're looking at here are going to come back and bear fruit at some point. But what is of note is that the town he's being drugged through is referred to as Timely. I find interesting because the town of Timely is actually a thing in the Marvel Comics universe. There's a place called Timely, Wisconsin, which was founded by Kang the Conqueror under the moniker of Victor Timely. Granted, the town of Timely, Wisconsin was something that wasn't founded until the early 1900s, more specifically 1901. So the fact that this town exists is kind of interesting, considering that this is like an old-timey Western town and the aesthetic of this particular dream is very Western-ish. So it does make me wonder like how all this plays in. It kind of, I mean, it's a dream, so technically none of this is actually real, but it is interesting and of note because it makes you wonder, will Kang the Conqueror make some kind of an appearance somewhere in this? It bears wondering. We also see Scott drug past one of those old-timey fortune teller kiosks, and the fortune teller in question is Destiny, so there's that as well. And because Destiny has very recently skirted around death, thanks to the character Elixir, after Mother Righteous tried to kill her and was actually pretty much successful in doing so, but Elixir was able to bring her back before she was too far gone. But it's safe to say she's going to factor into all this as well because, Destiny is still alive. And she is actively trying to get the remaining X-Men and other mutants that are in the White Hot Room. She's actively trying to figure out a way to get them out. Another thing that we see in this is the trial that is going on, and Scott is being judged by a council of judges that range from characters like Moira McTaggart, Dr. Stasis, Omega Sentinel, MODOK, and seemingly Charles Xavier. Cyclops makes a comment that one of the judges is someone who he thought he knew. Now, all of these are basically symbolism for the fact that Orchis is judging him, but it is very telling that Charles Xavier is among them. Not saying that he's a part of Orchis, but just a simple notion that Charles Xavier is probably the one person that Scott has probably always felt like he's been judged by, going back as far as the original X-Men series in 1963. And that's for better or worse. Someone who knows Scott better than almost anyone else, and yeah, it would seem like, especially considering the falling out between the two characters over the years, where it's kind of been on again, off again, them being on the same side, to even when they're on the same side, not really being on the same side. Now, another thing that comes up in this comic is the appearance of Jean Grey, and while technically it's also Jean Grey wielding the power of the Phoenix, you can see it on the brooch that she is wearing. Initially, when I saw the brooch, as my eyes were scanning the page, I initially thought maybe this might have been Madeline Pryor because she had a smile when Scott was getting ready to be hanged, and then as I read a little bit lower, I was like, oh wait, no, he's being stopped. Madeline probably would have let Scott fall, and she'd have saved him, but she would have let him fall first. And, then eventually she would save his life, and he would probably be in about roughly the same predicament that Havoc is in right now, if you haven't been keeping up with the Dark X-Men. But no, this brooch, while it looks similar to something that, Madeline Pryor would wear and actually does, this one has a phoenix emblazoned upon it. So yeah, this is in fact Jean Grey, and this is also why Cyclops has been stopped from falling in his dream. And this is something I feel is going to play out to be incredibly prophetic, because Cyclops makes several mentions of Jean in this one issue alone, constantly referring to her as someone that the Judge would not get along with, as well as a passing mention to a fiery redhead and so on and so forth. So yeah, Jean Grey, she is on her way, and despite the fact that she was recently killed in the Immortal X-Men finale of issue number 18, Jean does not stay dead for long. She's gonna factor into this sometime before the end of it. We just don't know how yet. Now, another thing I haven't thought very much of in the recent issues of Jerry Duggan's X-Men and Uncanny Avengers are the data pages where it's referenced by Dr. Stasis that they're gonna have Cyclops' trial in Paris, France. This is actually something that I never even really thought about, because it's not really something that's ever in the forefront of my mind, and that is the original X-Men versus Avengers story arc. This was a story arc back in 1987, if you're unfamiliar, where Magneto was being held on trial for atrocities he had committed in X-Men number 150 in 1981. In that issue, Magneto had killed an entire group of people on a submarine and also created a volcano in the middle of a city and destroyed the entirety of that city. So he was being held on trial for that, and one of the trials he faced was in Paris, France. So this is actually quite telling, and is made even more interesting when you think about the fact that when Magneto committed these atrocities, Cyclops was standing right next to him. So yeah, it's kind of like a full circle type of moment. Some other things that come up in this issue too that I think are of note is the fact that Cyclops reveals he's on to Omega Sentinel. This was such an amazing moment for no other reason than the fact that the whole time that this scene is carrying out, he's talking to Dr. Alia Gregor, a character we don't really see very much of. Since the House of X story arc, she pops up every now and then, and honestly, I sometimes forget that she exists because she just doesn't get used in anything since House of X. She appeared in a couple of issues of Jonathan Hickman's X-Men series, and that was really only just to remind you that she still existed. And ever since the creation of Nimrod, she just kind of faded away into the background. I think we saw her for a scant few moments in Jonathan Hickman's Inferno, but outside of Jonathan Hickman writing the character, we really don't ever see her up until recently. And if she does show up, she's usually like a background character who has no lines of dialogue whatsoever. She almost kind of acts as a silent observer. But what I love about this is that during a part of this conversation where Gregor believes that Cyclops is speaking to her, he is in fact talking to Omega Sentinel, who is also in the room, when he asks what is going to happen next when the last mutant has been killed. And Gregor in response says, I don't know, humans will live happily ever after. But that's when he reveals he's not talking to her. He wants to know what Omega Sentinel is going to say. And Omega Sentinel dodges the question entirely. And the reason why is because if she answered the question, it would give the whole game away. I have been saying since Inferno that Omega Sentinel is not in this for humanity. She reveals as much in Inferno that she was sent back in time by a trickster titan who looks very eerily like one of the Phalanx we saw in Powers of 10. Not only does it look like a Phalanx, but this Phalanx sent her back so that she could destroy mutant kind. And it is revealed in that issue as well that in Omega Sentinel's timeline, mutants always overcome humanity and win. She wanted to go where she could affect enough change that mutants don't win this time. Omega Sentinel is pretty much preparing the world for the coming of the Phalanx, and if you look back into some of Omega Sentinel's actions as of late and going over the last, I would say, couple of years, 2 or 3 years actually, you would probably notice that Omega Sentinel's not shy about killing humans, even the ones working for her. She doesn't care about humanity, and she knows Nimrod doesn't really care about humanity either. This was all evident when she admitted as much to Nimrod, and Nimrod is in hook, line, and sinker with what Omega Sentinel is selling. He's just playing along until it's time to strike, and these are all things that were hinted at and teased in Powers of 10 itself. This is something that was referred to in the year 100 of Moira's 9th life. Omega Sentinel and Nimrod, they were the ones who led the human-machine ascendancy. Humans weren't running the show. Machines were. And pretty much any human who worked for them was in some way, shape, form, or fashion mechanically modified. Humanity even merged themselves with machines even at birth. Forcefully, I mind you, in that particular regard. So yeah, this isn't about saving humanity. It's about having slaves, about subjugating an entire group of people, regardless of whether they're human or mutant. The Phalanx want all potential defenses and threats out of the way. Thus, why Omega Sentinel is helping Orchis take out mutants. And we know that mutants aren't the only people on the Sentinel kill list, because as we saw in Invincible Iron Man, also by Jerry Duggan, it was revealed that the Fantastic Four and the Avengers, a lot of characters who aren't mutants, were on the target list of the Sentinels. They want to get all potential forces that could stop them from taking over the entirety of the Earth out of the way so that they can run roughshod over it. That is the Phalanx's entire MO here. You do everything in small stages. It's like the frog being boiled in water. Like if you start out cold and raise it up to hot, the frog doesn't even know he's being cooked. You start first by infiltrating humanity. Then you start going after mutants. You get rid of mutants. Then you start going after the human forces that could stop you. You get rid of them, and then you take over humanity. They have no way to defend themselves. But getting back to Cyclops, Cyclops is actually being tried here, and it's funny because he's actually being tried by a bald man. It's just not Charles Xavier in this particular regard. However, it is also of note that the court is most certainly a kangaroo court. They've already made up their mind about Cyclops, and this is all just pageantry. She-Hulk is representing him, however, he doesn't want to defend himself. That's why you don't see She-Hulk in this issue. Cyclops is representing himself, and he's representing himself by not representing himself at all. Because, well, for one, he knows that none of this is going to work out for him, and I think Cyclops is also keenly aware of the old lawyer saying, a defendant who defends himself has a fool for a client and an idiot for a lawyer. Cyclops has already been judged, even by the judge himself, so what's the point? Now, getting back to the Orchis side of things, I mentioned earlier that Dr. Alia Gregor believed she was being addressed by Cyclops when asked the question about what happens when mutants are gone. What is next for Orchis? And while Dr. Alia Gregor, I'll go and say right now, has not changed her stripes, she is starting to see that the game is afoot, because when Orchis is celebrating the demise of mutant kind as it's impending thanks to what's going on with Cyclops' trial, Omega Sentinel sends Nimrod to go destroy Krakoa. And when she does so, she refers to what they're going to call Krakoa once it is destroyed, and refers to it as Sentinel City. This is a moment where you look at it, and I would forgive some people for not catching it, but Dr. Gregor, she raises an eyebrow because it catches her off guard. This is a moment where Omega Sentinel actually lets the mask slip a little bit in front of people who aren't Nimrod. This is probably the first time she's ever really given any hint of her true intentions in front of anyone that wasn't Nimrod at all. And Dr. Gregor is right to be concerned, because that means that humanity is not long for this earth unless they're willing to join the machines and in turn become machines themselves. I'm curious to see how Moira McTaggart feels about all this, because that's one thing we've never really seen. Moira McTaggart shares a lot of similar ideas and ideologies now as Omega Sentinel, which kind of makes you wonder why they even went the direction they went with Moira, because if you have Omega Sentinel around, do you really need Moira McTaggart? Because they're kind of angling for something fairly similar, albeit for different purposes. We know that Moira McTaggart is going to throw in her lot with the Phalanx in the end, And we already know that Omega Sentinel is doing about roughly the same. So it does, yeah, it bears wonder. You got two characters literally angling for the same thing and vying for panel time. But I feel like Moira is going to get to do some splaining very soon, so I'll reserve my judgment on that. That said, I mentioned that Nimrod attempts to destroy Krakoa, and I say attempt because he doesn't. He actually fails in that regard when he attempts to destroy Krakoa, thinking that it's inert, that it's paralyzed, that it can't do anything. Krakoa spits up a bunch of amber at Nimrod, effectively immobilizing him. And one would imagine with Krakoa, kind of disconnecting itself from the rest of the island in its giant form, why didn't it just crush Nimrod right then and there? And there's a couple of reasons for that. Krakoa is not at full strength right now due to recent events. That is why Krakoa escapes diving into the sea. And the other reasoning too is that we can't forget Nimrod is self-replicating. If Krakoa would have stomped down on Nimrod in its moment of weakness, all that would have happened is that the immobilizing effect that Krakoa had placed Nimrod in would have just completely gone away. And not only that, if he would have destroyed Nimrod, he just simply would have put himself back together and he wouldn't be immobilized anymore, and he could probably have created more of himself, and that just would have made an even bigger issue out of the whole matter. So that's probably the reason why none of this actually occurred. Nimrod is the type of character you can't just destroy. Anytime we've seen Nimrod, even completely obliterated, he always comes back because that's his thing. That's what makes Nimrod the most dangerous Sentinel ever created. Some other things that pop up in this issue that I thought were of note is Colossus and Wolverine. They have invented a new maneuver, an inversion of the fastball special, something that Colossus initially refers to as the Pinata special, but Wolverine shoots that down and then ends up being turned into the screwball special, because the whole idea being that if Colossus is hucking someone at Wolverine, then they're screwed. So yeah, that's the whole thing there. That's the joke. But at the same time, I got the sentiment, so I was okay with it. I was like, yeah, sure, why not? It was on brand for Colossus and Wolverine in this moment. It is also revealed this issue that Rasputin IV, who has been auspiciously absent from a lot of the recent issues of comics she would otherwise have appeared in. She kind of mysteriously disappeared from the X-Men comics. She has also kind of mysteriously just disappeared in general from the Immortal X-Men side of things, despite the fact that she's appeared in both of those comics up until a point. And now we know what's been going on, and this isn't something that was depicted in the Immortal X-Men series, where Charles Xavier has appeared the most as of late, and that is that she is helping Charles Xavier in some way, that they have been working together in tandem and just we haven't known about it until now. The question for this situation is, does Rasputin know that Charles Xavier has a hitchhiker in the form of Mr. Sinister? Because I feel like that would probably change her opinion on whether or not she would want to help Charles Xavier, considering the history between her and Sinister, even though technically the Sinister in question is not her Mr. Sinister, at least in terms of the fact that that was a future version of our Mr. Sinister. So I don't know, that one's kind of tougher. I feel like, once again, we'll learn more about that probably within the next couple of issues. Earlier in this issue, Nightcrawler casually mentions an invasion of Earth. For those that don't know what's going on there, it is actually referenced in the issue in like an editor's note to go check out Invincible Iron Man. If you have not done so, basically what's going on there is that in some of the more recent issues, Iron Man had basically set up a plan with Ironheart where he sent her to Nidavellir, in that there Ironheart was going to help the dwarves of Nidavellir build ships that could transport all of Arakko's mutants to Earth so that they could attack Orchis in mass with extreme prejudice. And that attack is basically being pushed ahead earlier than what they initially planned for. And we even see later in this issue that Kate Pryde is trying to rally the troops using the Krakoan gates, which, by the way, if you don't know, she is the only mutant who can use Krakoan gates right now. She is going all over the place, rallying everybody. She is getting the Avengers. She is getting the X-Men. She is getting all the other mutants who are available, the mutants on Arakko. And it's even implied that there's probably some other people on Earth that she's going to try and get the attention of. And while all this happened, there's even a little cheeky reference to Tony and Emma as Mr. and Mrs. X, which is, for those who don't remember, Mr. and Mrs. X was a 2018 comic book series starring Gambit and Rogue as the titular Mr. and Mrs. X. But this is also a callback to what Colossus and Kate Pride would have been referred to had they gone through with their wedding plans in the first place. But another thing that actually comes up too is that Kate, while she's rallying the troops, she tries to find Polaris. When Kate travels to Island M, Lorna Dane is nowhere to be found, and we see some of her more recent outfits just laying on the floor. Now, Kate is puzzled by where Lorna could possibly be, but the truth is we don't have to wait that long to figure it out because she's actually on nowhere. For those who have not been keeping up over the course of Jerry Duggan's X-Men series, the Brood, a parasitic alien species who have plagued the X-Men since 1982's Uncanny X-Men number 155, the Brood have recently been reformed, and the character Brew, who is a mutant Brood himself, and by mutant I don't mean that he has any special powers, but just the fact that he's different from a normal Brood. He doesn't have the same lust for violence that other Brood do. I mean, technically he does, but he's way better at controlling it than a normal Brood. He's incredibly intelligent and quite peaceful for the most part. During Jerry Duggan's X-Men number 21, Jean Grey had helped Brew relocate the Brood to nowhere, and Brew is using this opportunity to try to reform the Brood en masse. Polaris has shown up to nowhere to help bring the Brood to help fight back against Orchis. And it's actually pretty cool because, as I mentioned earlier, Lorna has gotten rid of her more recent costumes, and she's wearing something that's kind of a mix, like a blend of the costume she had in her original appearance in X-Men number 49 back in 1968, and a little bit of the fit that she wore during the early goings of House of X in 2019. But more specifically, something somewhat more modeled after the design of Magneto's white costume in the early goings of House of X as well. All in all, fantastic issue. While I don't feel this starts off as strongly as the original House of X, I do feel like it has a lot of stuff to chew on. But anyway, if you enjoyed this video and you want to see more of my videos breaking down the X-Men, as well as other comics from Marvel and DC, make sure you hit that subscribe button and tap that notification bell. That way you don't miss anything. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video out of a number of things you could have been watching on this platform. And until next time, let me know what you thought about the fall of the House of X number 1. Keep it plus ultra and sound off in the comments.